distinguished personalities, scholars, teachers, and respected participants, I welcome you all to the 27th webinar on the teaching of English. Let me extend my warm welcome to our guest speaker, Fan Gabriel Fang, Associate Professor of English, College of Liberal Arts, Shantou University, China, who is here to deliver his talk on promoting decolonizing pedagogy through translanguaging. I would also like to welcome our source of inspiration, the Lighthouse, the President of ELTAI Pune chapter, Dr. Z.N. Patil. I extend a hearty welcome to all our ELTAI office bearers, chapter members, and participants. I hope you all have been enjoying this series of webinars on the teaching of English. If you have missed any of our webinars, I would like to request you to go and watch them on our official Facebook page. Don't forget to like our page or never miss our programs in the future. I would like to mention that this webinar is being organized by ELTAI Pune chapter, MIT ADT University, and powered by Tolani Maritime Institute, Pune. Before I request Dr. Purnima Bakshi to introduce ELTAI Pune chapter, I'd like to inform you that feedback link of this webinar will be shared during the question and answer session. You are requested to write your name correctly. Please do not write it in full blocks. You are also requested to write your questions in Q&A section, which you can see on your screen. If you're watching us on Facebook, don't forget to post your questions in the comment box. Thank you. May I now request my colleague and office bearer of ELTAI Pune chapter, Rahul, to introduce ELTAI Pune chapter. Over to you, Rahul.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin sir. Distinguished guest and audience. On behalf of ELTAI Pune chapter, I'd like to begin by rendering very warm welcome to all of you. And I'm very much honored to have been asked to introduce the Pune chapter of ELTAI. ELTAI completed 50 years in October 2019, and what a great fortune. In the same year, ELTAI Pune chapter was inaugurated under the leadership of Professor Z.N. Patil. It was a humble beginning with very few teachers, but now it is one of the fastest growing and most active chapters in the country, with more than 240 members. Professor Sridhar Gokhale and Professor Prashant Sinha are the patrons of the chapter, and the chapter has proved to be one of the youthful and vibrant chapters and the far-sighted and incredible leadership of our president, Dr. Z.N. Patil. I'd like to underline that all our office bearers and all members of the ELTAI Pune chapters uphold the value of teaching profession. This is the stunning attitude of the Pune chapter. The chapter has been conducting workshops and training programs for students and teachers in collaboration with many institutes like English Language Teaching Institute of Symbiosis, College of Engineering Pune, Tolani Maritime Institute, and MIT ADT universities. And there are other chapters also who collaborate with us. The chapter is truly living up to its motto, reaching the unreached. The office bearers of Pune chapter have been invited by various national and international organizations to conduct sessions for them. Well, friends, during this challenging times of the pandemic, our chapter has conducted 26 workshops so far in collaboration with eMelta, MEET, MGR University, and ELTIS. Furthermore, the chapter has gone beyond academic activities and collected funds for the needy ones to meet their hospital expenses to fight against kidney cancer, mucormycosis, and so on. When Afghanistan was in turmoil, ELTAI Pune chapter came to the rescue of Afghan community in Pune. The registration fee, donation fee that we collected in the form of registration fee for the webinars, we donated that amount to the stranded Afghan students in Pune. We wanted to give them a strong message that to our Afghan brothers and sisters, that in this difficult times, we are always with them. Well, friends, through our activities, we not only want to contribute to the teaching community, but at large to the humanity. I thank each and every one of you for showering love and extending support and giving us your encouragement. Thank you, all of you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Rahul. Moving on, now to tell you more about MIT EDT University, would like to show a small video. I would now request Dr. Ashok Ghuge to kindly share the video.
A world-class university with a more personalized learning experience. MIT Art, Design and Technology University offers more than 125 plus unique, innovative and industry-relevant bachelor's and master's programs in engineering, marine engineering, bioengineering, food technology, management, film and drama, journalism, architecture, fine arts, applied arts, music and dance, humanities and Vedic sciences.
Enroll at MIT ADT University, Pune and transform yourself into a winning persona. Complete your application on www.mituniversity.edu.in or call on 9595124234.
Thank you, Ashok. I'm happy to share with you all that this series of webinars, we have been receiving many registration across the globe, and we wish to continue this journey all the way. Now, allow me to introduce our today's guest speaker to you all. Dear all, I feel honored and privileged to introduce today's guest speaker, Phan Gabriel Phang. Phan Phang obtained his PhD from the Center for Global Englishes, University of Southampton, UK. He is currently Associate Professor at College of Liberal Arts, Shanghai University, China. His research interests include global Englishes, social linguistics, language attitude, identity, intercultural communication, teacher education, and language teaching and learning. Phan Phang has published articles in journals including Asia Pacific Journal of Education, Asian Englishes, ELT Journal, English Today, Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development, Language, Culture and Curriculum, Language and Education, Language and Teaching Research, Lingua, and among many others. His latest books include a monograph titled Repositioning Accent Attitude in the Global Englishes Paradigm and an edited volume titled Critical Perspectives on Global Englishes in Asia. Once again, I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Phan Gabriel Phang. May I now request our guest speaker to deliver his talk. Over to you, sir, please.
Thank you very much for your very nice introduction, and thank you very much, Professor Patil, for your invitation. It's my great honor and it's my great privilege to deliver my talk here today. Let me share the screen. All right, so I hope that it's visible.
Yes,
so my talk, okay, great, thank you. So my talk today is promoting decolonizing pedagogy through translanguaging. And based on my research interest, I'm interested in applied linguistics and sociolinguistics. And I'm also like a researcher of the English language, and I'm also like a teacher of the English language. So the topic of translanguaging, I talk a bit of my like why I'm interested in translanguaging. So the topic of translanguaging basically is very popular recently, like for scholarship for applied linguistics, sociolinguistics scholar, because from a traditional dominance of English, we know that English is used as a lingua franca, as a global language, but we realize that many people were all multilingual speakers. So with only English, the English dominance would kind of hinder lots of opportunities for people. And some scholars, some research has also shown that English only in classroom teaching is not the most effective, it's not the most helpful way of learning. So all these are relevant to power and inequality, okay, power and unequal Englishes in ELT. So I'll talk a bit about this background of the use of language, especially the use of English language, and why we need translanguaging. Okay, I'm not sure, I don't know if you are familiar with this concept. I'll explain this concept a bit. Yeah, it's not a new term, but recently translanguaging has been adopted, has been used in like classroom discourse, pedagogical translanguaging to challenge the English only, challenge the monolingual ideology. All right, and I'll share with you a case study of translanguaging classroom discourse. That paper was published already. I'll share with you if you're interested in. We can have some follow-up discussions. And revisiting translanguaging pedagogies, the road ahead for language teachers, for educators, why translanguaging is a powerful concept, it's a powerful notion that to promote equality, to challenge the colonizing pedagogy. So how and why translanguaging can be used for decolonizing pedagogy. Okay, so all this start with some concerns of linguistic racism. All right, so that is the ideologies and practices that are utilized to conform, normalize, and reformulate an unequal and uneven linguistic power between language users, including the first language use and accent, etc. So for many language learners will see this this gap, okay, of the use of English. Especially we need to conform to native like English, while many learners of English, if they do not sound like native speakers, they will be kind of marginalized, right, as well as teachers. So here there is this kind of there is an ideology that for language learners, for language teachers, we follow, okay, the so-called standard native ideology. It's already rooted, but in fact, all right, the dominance of certain languages, particularly like the dominance of English, also raised some like concerns. For example, the concept of linguicism, okay, and if you're familiar with the concept of linguistic imperialism, right? So linguicism, ideologies and structures which are used to legitimate, effectuate, and reproduce unequal division of power and resources, for example, in language policy, okay, language assessment. So those kind of ideologies, those kind of structures are kind of reproduced, are kind of, you know, rooted to both, you know, language learners, language teachers, stakeholders, that they need to follow certain rules, they need to follow certain standards of language use, okay? So here, both material, non-material between groups which are defined on the basis of language. Okay, this group, native speaker of English, they speak British English. This group, American English, they speak American English. That group, non-native speaker of English, they speak Japanese English, for example. Okay, so this type of concept has been rooted. Okay, I think in reality, if we realize that language use is far more complicated, it's very difficult that we can just, okay, group people, okay, and define people, right? So there is a concern of the linguistic racism needs to be historicized and examined in relation to the socio-political contexts, okay, language and power, right? The socio-political contexts in which multilingual speakers are embedded. So we know the situation, we know the multilingual situation, and also has to be examined in conjunction with vitally important and adjacent work on linguicism, native speakerism, and racial linguistics. So language has been, you know, used and connected with race. So this concept is also, we really need to recognize, right, language and race, linguistic racism. Yeah, so this paper has been published in the International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualisms. If you are interested in, this is a very helpful, all right, article on this point. So we know the use of English is far more complicated, right? If we go back to race and language, people tend to group certain, as an adjective, Chinese users of English, Indian users of English, Japanese users of English. We tend to group this kind of adjective, which again, the use of English, we see the complexity. For example, the development of world Englishes, we have various varieties. Okay, Singapore English, Philippines English, Indian English. But also English is used as the regional lingua franca, right, among many national languages and local dialects. For example, in Singapore, for example, in the Philippines, in Nigeria, I'm sure that in India, the case is the same. We've got many, many local dialects, local languages, all right? So people use those dialects and languages along with English. So it seems that English has been positioned by people as a top powerful language, right? Which again, this concept is very deeply rooted, right? The complexity of English language, the content of English language as well. So that will create unequal Englishes. So we say that we use English, you use English. The speakers of English has also been categorized, right, into different groups. So the discussion of the English as a global language and its socio-educational implications cannot ignore the fact that far from being a situation to the dismantling this unequal power relations in the world, English is in fact often part of the problem. Okay, so if you use English, what type of English do you use? All right, so people like to tend to group people, categorize people based on the language, based on the accents, based on the word choice, everything, right? So they tend to group people simply based on people's use of English. But that is the issue, right? That is the problem, according to Ronnie Tupos and his the contributors of this article, of this volume. So again, for language teachers, for educators, right, we are teaching English. We use English in our daily life, but I'm sure that we don't want to reproduce this kind of colonizing ideology and colonizing pedagogy, right? So as language teachers, as language educators, we need to raise this awareness of the complexity of the role of English in higher education. For example, the English medium education. So English is used as a medium of instruction. Is that the most effective means of classroom discourse? Is that the most effective means of education compared to mother tongue instruction, compared to multilingual, to translingual education, right? So we need more empirical study. Yeah, we cannot just reach to an agreement of which one is the most effective. It also depends on different contexts as well. English for employment opportunities, right? So in many contexts, in many countries, if you cannot speak English, you lose many, many opportunities, especially for good jobs. So job interviews are conducted in English, right? Regardless of what type of job that you are looking for example. So in English, it seems like a gatekeeper that you need to pass this job interview before you can be admitted to the job, right? So there is a concern, right? There is a concern that, that English is like gatekeeping, right? Gatekeeping. So especially, I just saw this chat box, teaching different groups of people in heterogeneous class. Of course, that's remain a challenge. We need a common language, but again, like the teachers' awareness, right? So this type of de facto shared code in higher education. So internationalization, does English mean the language, the de facto language, of internationalization, whether the use of English, the strictly monolingual method of teaching would create linguistic discrimination, right? And of course, if a group of students, they have different like first languages for different cultures, that is also a concern, right? So English is still used as the common language, as a shared language. But if we really regard English as a shared code, fixed code in education, okay, that goes to the another issue, another question. Okay, so native speakerism. So if you are familiar with Holiday's notion of his claim of native speakerism, that is a pervasive ideology within ELT. We regard native speaker as the model, right? Regardless of what type of English, we just present this fixed native ideology, fixed native speaker, regardless different accents, different educational levels of native speaker, right? So it seems that this kind of notion has been taken for granted, that native speaker teachers represent a Western culture from which spring the ideals both of the English language and of English language teaching methodology. So we have to, as language teachers, I think we use those imported textbooks. We have to follow this type of, in TESOL, in teaching English as a global, teaching English to speakers of other languages, we have to follow those type of so-called Western, culture or Western teaching methods. So we have to adopt various teaching method into our classroom, right? So again, like according to Holiday, this native speakerism is seen instead as a divisive force which originates within particular educational cultures within the English-speaking West. All right, so still in today's ELT, this type of ideology is still rooted there, right? So as teachers, we are still told to follow certain norms, to follow certain standards, right? While Professor Kumaravadi-Velu argued that by their uncritical acceptance of the native speaker dominance, non-native professionals legitimize their own marginalization. It seems, we just regard, right, we are not as good teachers as native speakers. So in that sense, we just legitimize our own marginalization. So both the process of marginalization and the practice of self-marginalization bring to the fore the coloniality rather than the globality of the English language. So according to Professor Kumar, this is a reproduction of coloniality. It cast a long hegemonic shadow over the activity of TESOL, but of course that was proposed like a decade ago. But I think things are changing, but still we would need to raise this awareness for, we say, the decolonizing pedagogy, right? And also Professor Kumar also researched the representation of culture in textbooks. So he argues that the TESOL profession cannot remain oblivious to the fact that globalization has resulted in greater contacts between people of different cultures, leading to a better awareness of each other's values and visions. So we talk about this globalization, so people have this type of awareness, right? And to a firmer resolve to preserve and protect one's cultural liberty. But unfortunately, according to Kumar, many textbooks are still the reproduction of Anglophone cultures, of Western ideology. So his arguments, basically his concern is that not only policymakers, but also textbook preparation and production remained a centrally controlled, globally targeted activity with very little role for local ELT professionals. Yeah, so that is the concern that, again, for teachers, for language teachers, for content teachers, we are told to follow certain standards. We are told to follow certain top-down curriculum, for example, right? So little role. Okay, so I think if we reflect on our roles of language teachers, I don't know how much like teacher reflection that we are doing, and how much flexibility, how much leeway that teachers are given in your own context. But that is a concern, right? So the tension between retaining the culture and values associated with the mother tongue and the adoption of a national identity symbolized by a foreign language is not easy to reconcile. So again, we talk about language itself, but also we talk about culture, right? The representation of culture, our native culture and mother tongue, okay, our home culture, our local culture, compared to English. When we use English, when we learn English, when we teach English, do we reproduce this representation of Anglophone cultures, or do we reproduce this Anglophone, this native speakerism ideology? All right. So those are some issues. But the English language teaching today, we see lots of people, scholars, they argue the importance of decolonizing pedagogy. This notion of global Englishes language teaching, right? Again, if you are familiar with global Englishes and global English language teaching, okay, in theory, in research, all right, it has been recognized as a paradigm, as a this framework. But in reality, still, right, ELT practices seem to be relatively slow to reflect on global Englishes. So global Englishes is a notion to challenge this native speaker norm, or challenge its native speaker ideology, to respect multilingualism, various cultural diversity, right? The entrenched ideology of native speakerism is still salient in both job market and classroom practices. We have this top-down ideology, as well as the social markets. That's I don't know. So in many job advertisements, we still see that native only, right? We still want native speaker of English, regardless of their quality, their education level. It's basically, for example, a bachelor degree and native speaker. It has been taken for granted that this is the ideal model of language teacher. So this is the representation of native speakerism. Okay, so translanguaging. So the trans prefix that it starts to sort of be implemented into language teaching, and it has been raised as this type of theoretical, and also it has been regarded as an approach, right, as a practical theory of language. In Chinese, it's called 超语, so translanguaging, the trans. So language is a noun, right? But in reality, when people use language, it's very dynamic, it's very flexible. So people would say that the use of language is not fixed. It should be regarded as dynamic. So language is used as a verb. So languaging. And people also have different linguistic, cultural, multimodal resources. Okay. For example, when I'm delivering a talk at the moment, I don't simply use language, right? So you can see from this video, you can see all these resources. So I try to use eye contact, to use gestures, everything. My voice, sometimes I speak a bit fast, sometimes I just pause a bit. So here, the different multimodal strategies are also included, are also used for communication. So this translanguaging notion is that we need to go beyond the use of linguistic level when we realize, when we understand communication, right? So translanguaging has been regarded as a cognitive, psychological, social, linguistic, practical theory of language. And of course, there is an argument, there was a debate whether translanguaging is a theory or translanguaging is a practice or an approach. Okay, so it's kind of complicated if you depending on how you look at translanguaging, right? If we look at translanguaging as a decolonizing pedagogy framework, so it could be a theory, could be an approach. But if we look at translanguaging in practice, for example, pedagogical translanguaging, right? How teachers and plan the language use before the class, and how teachers adopt translanguaging in classroom discourse to help students, to help learning. So in that sense, translanguaging can be regarded as an approach, right? But anyway, translanguaging, this concept has been used to understand communication, to describe the complexity of communication. It's not about what type of named language, it's not about what type of fixed language that you are using, okay? So translanguaging regards the communication as a whole, all right? People's resources, linguistic, cultural, multimodal resources as a whole. So communication as a whole, okay, to understand meaning-making process. Okay, so it has been adopted to describe bi or multilingual speakers' complex language practices, because again, people code switch, people use various multimodal, right? Or people now, online internet communication, like people use emoji, people use stickers. Okay, people even form the new meaning, create the new meaning through, okay, the display of new languages and also the functions of language and also multimodal functions, right? And also multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of their bilingual worlds. So we talk about the playfulness of language, right? So for bilingual speakers, multilingual speakers, they create new meaning through their use of language, especially if you look at social media communication. Very, very many new meanings are created through social media by the bilingual, multilingual speakers, okay? Translanguaging also embraces code switching, first language use, multimodal, and further trans-semiotic practices. So here, image, right, pictures, again, has also been used, included as part of communication as a whole. So here, from the English-only monolingualism, from this traditional concept of, the use of language in education, to the complexity of language use, to the multilingual perspective, to the translingual perspective, that language in context to create new meanings. So language, again, should no longer be viewed as codes. Though if we look at code switching, we see, okay, when you switch from Chinese to English and English to another language, it's just one code to another code. But from the translanguaging perspective, we don't simply use one code to another code. So during the communication, during the conversation, it happens with various linguistic, cultural, multimodal, right, diversities, resources that underneath, that from your cognition, etc., from your culture, from your psychology, psychological aspect, that's determine what a speaker would say. Yeah, so it's not simply about one language to another language, it's about all the complex process through this, the meaning-making process. So again, we also need to recognize one's cultural background, linguistic background, to understand how this speaker would use certain language for what purposes, right? So here the perspective of languaging as a verb, moving, also challenges the concept of named languages and revisits the traditional hierarchy and superiority of the Anglophone varieties of English. Okay, so we have to understand, we don't simply communicate with British or American English, the Anglophone varieties, Australian varieties, but it's a whole, it's the complex, right? This is the communication. So people adopt various linguistic cultural resources. So in that sense, yeah, especially if we share certain linguistic resources, it's easier for people to perform translanguaging. But again, for people with different groups, if they share certain groups, they can use this translanguaging perspective. But again, when they report in a whole class that people share different first languages, heterogeneous group, okay, they can use the lingua franca, they can switch to English, of course. So this is allowed. But for discussion, if people have the same different linguistic resources, they can shift to some other languages, okay, to perform this translanguaging, to perform this, this, I think it's basically for this meaning making, okay, knowledge production. Okay, so it depends on various contexts. People are free, people should be given freedom for the language use and language choice. All right, but many contexts, regardless of people's different linguistic cultural group, there is a top-down policy, especially this ELTAI, English language teaching policy, generates a false image between the local and the global, and creates this invisible hierarchy between the center. So there is a representation of the center, right? That is the native. Okay, so you create this west-north. So this is west and north. Okay, the center, and the periphery, like Asia, Latin America, global south. So English is still perceived as the property of its native speakers. So again, we need to move from a monolingual ideology to a multilingual one in teaching and learning. The prevailing monolingual ideology that students' first language should be excluded in target language teaching has been challenged. All right, this is not supported by empirical evidence. Basically, there is many teaching methods, teaching methodology that students are exposed. Students should be exposed to target language only, right? Some empirical evidence has shown that is only target language is not the most effective, right, learning method. And multilingual resources is the linguistic and cultural capital. So everyone, we have various linguistic cultural resources. So these are the cultural capital for individuals to maximize learning and achieve a balance between language and content, language learning and content understanding. So we use English as a medium. We use linguistic cultural resources as a medium to understand, the content, right? So again, we have to perform our various linguistic cultural capital or capita, right? So translanguaging is a new concept in response to the call for multilingual perspective in language teaching and learning. So it's multiple discursive practices, right? And also these pedagogical translanguaging. So the plan strategy. So as teachers, they are aware of students' linguistic resources. Okay, if students come from various heterogeneous group, various different resources, the teachers are aware of when should use what language, okay, to deliver some instruction, or what type of translanguaging can be conducted, can be performed, which may not impede understanding, which may not marginalize certain groups of students. Okay, this is the pedagogical translanguaging. So the planned strategies based on the use of students' resources from the whole linguistic repertoire. All right, so let's go to the teacher's awareness of planned translanguaging. So translanguaging foregrounds the different ways language users employ, creates, and interprets different kinds of signs to communicate across contexts and participants and perform their different subjectivities. And so here I will introduce a study. So here we adopt the concept of translanguaging, recognizing its complexity, including the need to shuttle between languages and the multimodal nature of communication. Before that, I would recommend this book. It's open access, Pedagogical Translanguaging, by Professors Channels and Gorter, very famous key scholars on translanguaging. Okay, so this is published in Cambridge University Press. Pedagogical translanguaging. So for teachers, for researchers, if we are interested in translanguaging, okay, I think this can be a good starting point, especially to understand classroom discourse. Okay, so why we conducted this piece of research, basically. So researching classroom discourse practices will further resonate with the implementation of translanguaging in various contexts to understand various issues of language related to identity, power, and inequality viewed through a sociolinguistic lens. So again, I am interested in language and identity, language and power, right? So the concept of global Englishes, again, challenges this fixed, this center-oriented language use. So from a sociolinguistic perspective, this is a powerful notion. And translanguaging pedagogy could provide a more comprehensive picture of classroom discourse practice to examine how stakeholders deal with the tension between the rigid English-only policy and the students' practical language needs in classroom practices. Again, more research is needed, to understand these different contexts and how people would use translanguaging based on the different attitudes, and whether they do this on purpose or whether they do this consciously or unconsciously, right? So again, more research will be needed. So I'd like to introduce this piece of research published in Lingua. So again, if you're interested in, I can share this paper with you and we can have some follow-up discussions. So researching translanguaging for classroom discourse. So we had 3 research questions. The first one, what kinds of translanguaging practices have been adopted by both teachers and students at the Chinese university in this study? So we adopted classroom observations to understand the translanguaging practices. Okay, so after the observation, we were interested in students' attitudes. Okay, so if they perform, like, how do they feel about the use of translanguaging, attitudes towards translanguaging practices at this Chinese university? And we also interviewed teachers. For students' attitudes, we conducted a questionnaire. And for teachers' attitudes towards and reasons for translanguaging practices. So again, we wanted to explore their reasons. So for research question 3, we adopted interview. So classroom observation, the questionnaire and interviews to understand this, the picture of translanguaging use in the context. So, so in English as a medium of instruction, again, we didn't simply focus on English medium of instruction. So we had foreign language classes, as well as EMI content courses. So you see that those teachers had some experiences abroad, right? And also the overseas experience, and also the various teaching experiences, right? Okay. So for the first research question, there are translanguaging practices. So we summarized some types of translanguaging practices, including concepts, language point explanation. So yeah, I think based on your experience, maybe you will translanguage or you will perform translanguaging. Comprehension check, content knowledge localization, because some local concepts, some knowledge for local concepts is very difficult to explain in English, and students cannot really understand. If teachers perform translanguaging, this type of performance can really touch students' hearts, right? Instead of simply stick to English only or foreign language only. Okay, so instruction reinforcement and also creation of class rapport. Yeah, that I think in some sense the teachers were aware of the use of translanguaging. Okay, it's not unconscious; they are conscious about the use of translanguaging. Okay, so some cases, yeah. So this is an example. I'm not going to read, yeah, in Chinese. So I'm not going to read, but the first case that this teacher adopted translanguaging for concept and language point explanation, and also this teacher adopted visual aids. Okay, we see the use of multimodality with this whiteboard explanation. So this was an example of explaining the cause and effect writing. Yeah, so to clarify the differences, the teacher frequently used the student shared first language to facilitate their understanding. Okay, the second case, the teacher, another, I think it's another teacher, right? Yeah, T4, another teacher, adopted translanguaging for comprehension check. So here the teacher used Chinese to check if students understand the key concepts, right? And to help them develop this bilingual literacy. So the teacher would ask students, yeah, use this Chinese, but the teacher would hope to students to use to understand the word of utility, okay, novelty, creativity. So use the Chinese to check whether students understand. This is the legal, the law class. So this is the requirement of patentability, right? Yeah, patentability. So the third example is the translanguaging used for content knowledge for local terms. Okay, so this was the original PowerPoint slides by the teacher, the original PowerPoint slides. Yeah, so we see that the teachers also use this multimodal. This is also an example of translanguaging. Yeah, to help students understand those localized terms. Those are Chinese cultural specific words. Yeah, I think in India as well, there are lots of local cultural specific words which are very, very difficult to explain in English. While even it's translated in English, it just loses the meaning, the original meaning, right? So here the teachers just used the translanguaging to share students' first language to help understanding, to help explaining the local concepts, especially this is the localized concepts for understanding, especially to understand the legal principles. So it's even far more complicated to use English. The teachers might be able to use English to explain, but it creates lots of complexity and unnecessary, explanations, right? In that sense. Okay, translanguaging for instruction reinforcement. Okay, this is another case that the teachers explained how to accomplish the task. Yeah, to clarify hints across and down, etc., etc. And this is the last one to create class rapport. Yeah, so the teacher used a metaphor, a good stuff, okay, to refer to the writing sample. So as good stuff. Yeah, so it's again to create a class rapport. The students were laughing. Yeah, when the teacher said, oh, I will give you some other good stuff. Okay. So for the student attitudes, we administered the questionnaire. So we will see in general, students were positive, neutral, okay, when the acceptance of the teacher's translanguaging practices, and also students' acceptance of their own translanguaging practices. Okay, so it seems, okay, if we just look at very briefly, the students are more acceptable for the teachers, but they're still less acceptable. But in general, it's still, okay, more like about 3 for the mean score. So here the students generally hold a neutral to positive attitudes towards translanguaging. Multilingual students generally accept translanguaging as a natural and appropriate practice that improves their confidence and facilitates their second language learning. So among different translanguaging use situations, the students agree most on translanguaging for scaffolding. All right, so this is also a learning strategy. So they believe the use of translanguaging would help them for scaffolding. So including all these concepts. So the finding supports the students' needs for translanguaging strategies. How about the teachers? So the teachers form 2 different understandings of translanguaging. The first group, the optimal position. So it seems that T2, okay, so first language is used for highlighting a point. Okay, the using first language would help capture their attention. Another teacher to inject humor. Okay, so goes to the classroom rapport, and also the use of translanguaging here, compromise communication. So they use all English would compromise communication between teachers and students. So using Chinese brings us closer. So another group, the maximal and virtual position. So we see that some teachers will argue that in courses, both PowerPoint presentations and lectures are required to be in English only. We have the English only policy in our staff meeting, and we have a principle in class of using English only. This is an unspoken rule. So we see different understanding, but it's understandable, right? So the quick summary is that despite the English only policy, the teacher participants utilize translanguaging strategies to facilitate content learning, including all these strategies. And teachers show different positions towards translanguaging. So the teachers in favor of translanguaging strategies recognize more functions of translanguaging practices. But of course, we also need to realize the challenges that's the influence of the monolingual policy. And the second one is the students' overuse of first language. Yeah, if we simply adopt translanguaging without making sure, understanding like why and in what occasions and to what extent and how much we use translanguaging. So we still go beyond control, it goes beyond limits, so which is not the ideal, right? It's not an appropriate way of learning. So the implications here, although the role of English is undoubtedly prominent in students' future employment and career development, it does not mean that mastery of English only would naturally lead to optimal outcomes in terms of content, subject learning, and enhancement of English language proficiency. So what does it mean if we use EMI, if we use English only to convey knowledge, whether the use of English only is the most effective means of teaching method? I think we need more research, more studies. And the adoption of English as a language of instruction here should be contextualized. Again, depending on the different nature of group of students, right? How much translanguaging can be used, can be adopted, right? And why and for what purposes do teachers and students adopt translanguaging? So those need to be considered, right? We talk about translanguaging, we don't really promote translanguaging blindly either, right? So here, those policymakers should reconsider the feasibility and availability of the necessary resources for EMI and understand first languages and local cultures as resources to promote translanguaging pedagogies and challenge linguistic inequality and racism. Okay, so we need to develop this multilingual education for translanguaging pedagogies. Systematic and contextualized translanguaging pedagogical strategies should be developed, building a TESOL field that wholly embraces and builds upon the dynamic cultural and linguistic repertoires of our students across contexts. Okay, so we need to recognize the biases in linguistic innovation and change. Again, English and European languages, one language at a time, monolingual bias, and also language in its convention and narrowly defined sense of speech and writing and not other modalities. So translanguaging means not only transcending the boundaries between named languages, but also the boundaries between what has traditionally been regarded as linguistic and other non-linguistic cognitive and semiotic means, right? So again, even we are doing this online lecture, people don't simply understand my verbal communication, right? So here, when we produce knowledge or give a lecture, people understand this communication as a whole. When we produce knowledge, when I say something, I have my cognitive actions, okay, I've got my psychological actions, I need to control my time, I don't know, I need to check my time constantly, maybe I still have about 5 minutes to finish the talk, etc. And when you are listening to this talk, I think you are processing knowledge. Some may agree, some may disagree, some may say, oh, you are talking about, I don't agree with you, da, 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 da. Lots of cognitive, lots of semiotic processes, psychological processes. But traditionally, we simply regard communication from this linguistic level. We neglect various complicated process of meaning making, of communication. So I think here the notion of translanguaging is powerful, that we need to understand what communication really means. So this approach helps us overcome monolingual and lingual biases. Yeah, so we don't simply produce linguistic level. But so the ELT in transition, right? ELT in transition. So focus on monolingualism. This is a very traditional monolingual speaker English only decontextualized classrooms to the focus on multilingualism. So we need multilingual speaker English and the whole linguistic repertoire, and also we need to understand the social context of language use in reality instead of classroom drilling without understanding of the actual use of language in the social context, right? So I think we have, for teachers especially, we need to develop this awareness and also this multilingual lens, reconsider the monolingual bias in traditional second language acquisition theories, and adopt the sociolinguistic perspective of what competence means. Okay, so competence does not mean linguistic competence, but from the linguistic level, we also need to understand the pragmatic level, the social level, okay, etc., to understand this meaning making. So bio-multilingual speakers instead of constructing societal monolingualism as the norm, and also respect linguistic and cultural resources as people's repertoire, right? Okay. Recognize students' first language use as the language resources, and allow translanguaging as a natural linguistic practice. But again, we don't force students to translanguage either. If students feel that they want to stick to their language, certain language use is their option. But if students want to use their linguistic and cultural resources, again, it's their option. So I think for teachers, we need to give students much freedom, of course, if students feel that it's helpful to making sense of this communication. But again, translanguaging, we also need to understand whether to what extent we use translanguaging, right? For lower level students, probably we recognize that they need to use more of their first language. But when for higher level students, if they really want to maximize their linguistic level, right? If they want to use more English and translanguage a little bit, again, depends on the context. I can't say whether it's right or whether it's wrong, okay? So basically we need to promote this mindset for language teachers. And the anti-racist pedagogy, all right? The de-colonizing pedagogy addresses the intertwined nature of race and language teaching, and also supports both students and teachers in recognizing and making visible the racialized nature of language. So in summary, the quote is that the study of world Englishes and translanguaging share multilingual ideologies and can enrich each other so as to contribute to the developing of multilingualism in education and elsewhere. So the development of synergies between the two areas will certainly strengthen the expansion of multilingual ideologies. So Lippi Green, if you are interested, her book, English with an Accent, is very, very powerful. So she described the English used in the US. So here the question is, this is her quote, can the unbroken circle of intimidation, so intimidation, the people are not allowed to use their first language, and the people are told to eliminate their own accents, right? So the unbroken circle of intimidation truly not be broken, or do we like things the way they are? Language serves as a convenient excuse to turn away. Are we unwilling to consider a nation in which the cost of success is achievement measured by other fairer means? So language subordination is about taking away the basic human right to speak freely in the mother tongue without intimidation, without standing in the shadow of other languages and peoples. To resist the process, passively or actively, is to ask for recognition and acknowledgement. Okay, so if first languages and linguistic resources are not recognized, are not acknowledged, how can we produce this equality? And how can we promote this equal education, and how can we promote this inclusive education, right? So again, for Lippi Green, for her, for many scholars, educators who would like to promote equality, who would like to promote inclusive education, it is a demand for the simple right to be heard, okay? So a quote at the end is that language is a practice that constructs and is constructed by the ways language learners understand themselves, their social surroundings, their histories and possibilities for the future. So we really need to position the language use in the society to understand the realistic use of English, instead of simply looking at English as a code itself, okay, without understanding of the complexity of the language used in society. So I think I'll finish my talk 2 minutes to promote. I want to promote 3 special issues that will be out very soon. One is in the Journal of Asian Pacific, Journal of Second and Foreign Language Education. There was an edited volume. So the theme of this issue is rethinking language policy and planning in the Greater Bay Area of China, insights from translanguaging theory. Again, if you're interested in language use, especially Greater Bay China. So Professor Li Wei wrote a foreword for this special issue. Okay, and very, very powerful editorial team. So 3 parts. The first part with some studies focusing on Hong Kong SAR. Second part some studies focusing on Macau SAR. And part 3 is the Guangdong. So I'm from this province. So it's part of Greater Bay Area of China. So yeah, I contributed a paper, Global Englishes and Translanguaging in Textbook Design Curriculum Development. So here, if you're interested in this special issue. So and second one is Translanguaging in Language Teaching and Learning current practices and future directions. So I'm guest editing this special issue with Professor Lawrence Zhang and Dr. Pramod Sa. So this will be out very soon. I think this is the coming August issue. So again, yeah, we are very fortunate that Professor Li Wei and Professor Ophelia Garcia also contributed a paper here, and Professor Channels and Professor Gorter also had a paper, and also Professor Angeline. So here we've got this issue covering various aspects of translanguaging, from a classroom discourse, from the attitudes, and also we've got a paper on translanguaging for classroom assessment, right? We are also fortunate with a very, very powerful team, and also teacher agency as well. Okay, so this is the papers. This issue will be out very soon in this coming August. Another issue that I'm co-editing with Dr. Sander Dovchin at Curtin University, Australia. So by the way, the forthcoming Sociolinguistic Symposium will be held in Curtin University in 2025, if not 2025, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, 2024, 2025. Yeah, so reflection and reform of applied linguistics from the global south. So again, we talk about this kind of ideology, we talk about this language use. We need to empower people, scholars, not simply working at the global south geographically, but also working for this equality, okay, of education, okay, working for the equality, to empower people from the global south, yeah, regardless of their location. Yeah, it's not a geographical term when we say global south. So here we've got also papers on this concept of translanguaging, all right, translanguaging and Aboriginal identity, and also translingual English discrimination. Again, people are recognizing, right, and epistemic injustice and neoliberal imaginations in English medium instruction as well. So we've got another paper on teachers' adoption of translanguaging. We have a paper on the testing, right, and what international really means in testing. Yeah, Professor Shaila Shatana also had a commentary in this issue. So this will be published in Applied Linguistic Review. So this will be online very soon. Yeah, this will be online very soon. So all the papers have been done here. So I think, yeah, again, if you're interested in this articles, papers, feel welcome. Yeah, we have some follow-up discussion. And I think that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. Any comments and questions are welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Gabriel Fang, for that wonderful talk, sir. It was indeed very informative. Thank you once again. Thanks a lot. Now it is time for a very important thing. We will have a virtual group photograph. I would like to request all the panelists to switch on their cameras for a beautiful photograph. All the panelists are requested to switch their cameras on so that we can capture this moment. Yes. This gives us a wonderful frame to capture this moment. So everyone keep smiling. Let me capture this moment and record it for our own official records. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Now I would like to request Dr. Purnima Bagchi, one of our office bearers, to summarize the takeaways and forward the participants' questions to our guest speaker.
Thank you so much, sir. Promoting Decolonizing Pedagogy through Translanguaging by Dr. Fang was indeed a very invigorating session. And I thank you so much, sir, for your detailed, elaborate presentation on this concept we actually got a plethora of insights in this particular topic. The presentation began with the outline of how it will be dealing with power and unequal Englishes in ELT, as well as a case study, along with revisiting translanguaging pedagogies, the road ahead. After which, we had some important introductory remarks on linguistic racism and some of the literature review, which gives us more insights into use of English and the development of world Englishes alongside unequal Englishes. So any discussion on unequal power relations in the world with regard to English was problematic. So Sir also tried to talk about native speakerism, T-Soul profession, as well as the representation of culture in textbooks, along with shedding some light on the tension between retaining the culture and values associated with the mother tongue and adoption of national identity symbolized by a foreign language, how it's not so easy to reconcile. Then we moved on to the discussion related to English language teaching today, as well as discussing the top-down policy and the social market, how translanguaging is more about a cognitive psychological process, and how it talks about communication being a very, very complex process. So it also very well discussed the dichotomy between whether translanguaging is a theory or approach or whether it's a practice. After which we went into maybe delving deeper into understanding the whole idea of meaning-making process that is involved in the translanguaging aspect, be it as a theory or as a practice. After which, Sir very well discussed the perspective of languaging, how, you know, it is a verb and how it tries to deconstruct the idea of the monolingualism picture, and what is the gap which gets created and also gets carried forward as a false image, or maybe a product of the invisible hierarchy, where the center and the periphery, the dichotomy still exists between the speakers, so the native speakers and the global speakers of English. After which we then had some very important books related to translanguaging, where Sir had some of his papers and presentations discussed. And then once we started with the case study, so first talked about the research questions involved in translanguaging in the case study, where he talked about the four very pertinent questions, and then moved on to the findings, that is the translanguaging practices that gave us with regard to the concept, the comprehension check, the content knowledge localization, the instruction reinforcement, the creation of class rapport, so on and so forth. Sir also shared some very nice, interesting examples with help of the screenshots related to all these aspects. And he also shared the samples of the pedagogical sessions that happened as a part of the case study. Finally depicting student attitudes, the teacher interviews, as well as quite a few aspects that were involved in this whole process. It was indeed a brilliant presentation, sir, because you also tried to summarize all the points and finally gave your inputs on multilingual education for translanguaging pedagogies. And last but not the least, the most important aspect, where you shared so many resources related to this very pertinent topic. So thank you so much once again for your interesting remarks. We would now move on to the question and answer session. And I already see like few questions in the Q&A panel. So, so the first question to you is, translanguaging is seen negatively in Indian classrooms, but an interesting fact is that it is used continuously in the classrooms. It really helps to all the stakeholders in teaching learning process. So how is it seen in Chinese university? Is it looked at as positively or negatively? Your input, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful summary before I try and answer the question. I really enjoyed this summary. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question too. So very interesting. I really recommend and I second this point because again, it seems that when we have this policy, we want to promote this type of university ranking, or we want to promote internationalization. So we just portrayed ourselves as English medium instruction university for like this internationalization. But even this course has been designed as English only. For teachers, if we share the linguistic repertoire with students, cultural repertoires with students, it's very natural, it's very, unconscious. We just switch sometimes, okay, depending on different contexts. We would naturally switch to students' first languages when we explain, for different purposes, for different strategies. Whether positively or negatively, I can share with you another story that I talked with a more novice teacher, that she told me that in the first class, when she delivered a lecture, she would try to speak very, very fast, English only, to see, okay, to just establish her authority to students. Okay, which partly answer this question is that if teachers use too much translanguaging, or if teachers use too much first language code switching, students would also challenge the teacher's quality. Okay, so I think for more experienced teachers, they kind of realize it's not the case, right? And they would be more aware of their use of translanguaging, their use of various resources to help learning. So, and later when students go to higher grade, higher level of learning, they would also realize that if the teacher speak English only and speak very, very fast, regardless of students' English or their language competence, he or she is not so-called, I don't know, a good teacher, right, or qualified teacher. Because for teachers, we need to understand the students' needs, right? How we accommodate students, how we pass on the knowledge, how we convey our knowledge, instead of showing off ourselves of the use of language, right? So make it short, is that some students and teachers would really see translanguaging from a negative perspective. But I think as long as they are made aware of the use of translanguaging, pedagogical translanguaging, and as long as they are made aware of the use of translanguaging to a certain extent, right? Like, of course, when we talk about translanguaging, we don't make 80% of the discourse lectures in the first language, in local language either, right? So as long as it's planned, the pedagogical translanguaging, as long as teachers and students are told, are aware of why this strategy is used for what purposes, I think in that sense, they can turn to this very traditional negative stigma to a more natural process of language or multimodal use for knowledge learning, for knowledge acquisition, I guess. I hope that I answered the question.
Indeed, I think, as you rightly said, anything in excess is bad. So the teachers probably should strike the right balance. This question was from Mr. Naraude. I think the next question is from Mr. Alvin, who says, hello, sir. My question is, in a multilingual classroom, some of the students are exposed to certain language, whereas the teacher does not know that language of the student. So in that sense, how can the teacher use translanguaging?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is another very interesting question. Again, make it simple is that teachers in that sense probably would use a common language for lectures. And if teachers, him or herself is also multilingual, so the teachers can also translanguage, I don't know, using his or her repertoire, following up by explaining what he or she means. And in that sense, if teachers are more flexible, he or she can still allow students who share the same linguistic repertoire, there are certain language, if they also translanguage, for example, for this discussion, and even for their like communication with the group, as long as it's explained by the language that the teachers and students share with. Yeah, I think translanguaging should help knowledge acquisition, right? We don't simply say, oh, people should use translanguaging, but when we use translanguaging to impede communication, okay, we don't want to do this either, right? So I think we need to be aware of this. So teachers can translanguage and students can also translanguage. I think as long as they are aware of this and they are explaining, yeah, they learn to explain like what they want to express through their language use. I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah, I think for teachers, if they translanguage without explanation, if the teachers and students do not share the same language linguistic resources, I think this is not an ideal way of teaching either, right? So I think translanguaging is perfectly fine regardless of whether teachers and students, but depending on the purposes, depending on like how and why they use translanguage, but if they don't share the same linguistic code, following up with an explanation, I think this is also learning, right? From the teachers and students and from students to teachers. I think for teachers, we would also learn from students as well. So I think this is a mutual process. So we don't simply use translanguaging from the teacher's perspective to teach the students, but also we can communicate, right? We also learn from students' perspective. So I think in this sense, it's also for contribution. It's also for knowledge, learning and development. I think this is a mutual process. So I think in this sense, it's fine. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So my question, like hopefully this is the last question, and participants, if you still have any question, please feel free to post in the Q&A section. Meanwhile, sir, my question to you is, where, sir, do you exactly see translanguaging as a concept departing from the GT method, that is the grammar translation method?
Yeah, I think it's another very interesting question. I think here the adoption of translanguaging should also depend on the students and teachers level, right? Mm-hmm. If students are at the low intermediate, if they cannot really understand language, if they cannot express well using certain like the English or some other languages, probably we should not allow too much translanguaging, right? In that sense, if students are not able to understand this whole process of communication, so they may still need to be exposed to some more traditional way of teaching. But if students have like developed to a certain level of language, especially their multilingual resources, so they are able to, you know, shuttle between, so here translanguaging is to shuttle between their various linguistic cultural resources. I think in that sense, translanguaging might be or can be adopted, okay, in classroom, but teachers would still, if they are aware of like planned translanguaging, they will start to see how much level, okay, how much, to what extent that language or what language or translanguaging can be used, and how students respond to the teacher's perspective. So gradually, so teachers can adopt translanguaging and also adapt their language use, right, the instruction, to see if students would constantly need what type of language use and what type of communication, yeah, means. I think, yeah, depends on, I think, I don't know, like, again, that reminds me of Professor Kumar Ravadivelu's post-method language teaching. So I think it's the particularity, possibility, and also I can't remember particularity, possibility, and another one, practicality, I think. Yeah, so the various ways of, yeah, practice, teacher-student communication, and we see the possibility of this context that goes to the needs and the ways of communication. I think they may find a better fit. of language use.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Do we have any more questions from the panelists?
Purnima, I just would like to ask very quick question
Sure.
because I'm not able to type the questions there. Thank you, Professor. It was very thoughtful and research-oriented presentation. My question is, how translanguaging be differentiated from code switching? That is my first question. And another question is, if students are less inclined towards the weaker language in the multilingual classroom, how to handle that situation as a teacher? So thank you. These are the two questions.
Thank you very much. A very helpful, interesting one. So translanguaging and code switching, I think when we talk about code switching, we would really see from linguistic code level. So language is viewed from a more fixed perspective. So we switch from one code from another code, right? So language is regarded as more fixed perspective. But translanguaging, again, is not, for the mainstream scholars, it's not about linguistic use, it's about communication as a whole, right? So linguistic level is part of translanguaging, but also multimodal level, semiotic level, all right? And linguistic level, they also recognize, for example, the super-segmental features as well. So pauses, pitch, stress, etc. So they will view communication as a whole. So that is the translanguaging perspective, and translanguaging is more dynamic, more fluid. Okay, so I hope that this is the
yes,
first
I got it. Yes, thank you.
Okay, the second one, if students do not share, right? Again, that goes to the extent if really monolingual, but I think now many classes and the ratio of students, I guess that we've got more multilingual classes than monolingual classes. If students are very monolingual, probably the teachers would adopt translanguaging from the multimodal aspect, from the pictures, from the semiotic perspective, the images, etc., to create the various opportunities for learning, instead of, from linguistic level, if students can only speak English, probably it's a bit difficult, but I think now many people are multilingual, right? But the students can only, and the teachers and students only share the same one single code. In that sense, translanguaging might not be performed well from the linguistic level, but maybe from the multimodal level, from the semiotic level, so the teachers can also create some other opportunities to perform translanguaging in another sense. So hopefully, this is the second.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very
Thank you so
much.
much. Yes, thank you.
So I suppose that we have no more questions, and thank you so much, sir, for answering all the questions so patiently. Over to you, Dr. Sachin Kadikar.
Yes, thank you, Purnima, for handling the question and answer session meticulously. Thank you so much. I would now like to request Dr. Zaran Patil, the President of ELTAI Pune chapter, to offer special comments. So over to you.
Thank you, Sachin, and thank you everybody sitting there. I really enjoyed the talk delivered by Professor Fan Fang. So thank you very much, Professor Fang, for this wonderful discourse that you delivered today for us, for our teachers. And I'm sure our teachers and our friends, researchers enjoyed your talk very much. So thanks a lot for accepting our invitation and honoring our invitation. Now, my job is to supplement, to complement whatever you have said during those 60, 70 minutes. Now, I believe that there are two aspects to communication, and everyone knows these two aspects. The first aspect is the non-verbal or non-linguistic aspect of communication, and the second one is the major one, or people say that non-verbal aspect is a major one and linguistic or verbal aspect is a minor one. Anyway, that doesn't matter, but I believe that there are two aspects to communication. The first one is non-verbal aspect, the second one is verbal or linguistic aspect. And I'm going to share with you a few points, and I'll try to be as brief as possible because now our time is running out. So when we talk about translanguaging, we basically keep in mind things like turn taking, eye contact, and physical closeness between the speaker and the listener, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm basically a storyteller. I believe in narrating things and sharing my experiences, pleasant and unpleasant, positive and negative experiences. Way back in 1990, I was awarded a British Council scholarship, and I was placed in the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And I was supposed to do a diploma and master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages. Before I went to England, the British Council authorities in Mumbai called me and called other members. There were 4 people who were selected that year. And these 4 people came from 4 parts of the country, east, west, north, and south. And I was chosen from the western sector. So we were all called to Mumbai, to the British Council office. And we were given some tips, some cultural inputs. And they said, please remember one thing, our culture here in India is different from the culture over there in Britain. So when you land in Heathrow, when you land in London, for example, or when you go to Edinburgh, many beautiful girls will welcome you and kiss you. So don't misunderstand. Don't take that kissing part of the interaction as falling in love with you. So kissing in our country is done in private, but kissing there is done in public. So that's one cultural aspect that we were supposed to bear in mind while we were doing our MA course or diploma course before that. So, I'm talking about the 2 aspects, the verbal aspect and the non-verbal aspect. First, I'm talking about the non-verbal part of it. And the example that I just cited a couple of minutes ago belongs to the non-verbal aspect of communication. Secondly, I'd like to say a word or 2 about turn taking. When I converse with you or when I converse with people around me, I take my turn and I'm the first speaker, and there is another speaker who waits for his or her turn to take. So turn taking is also an important phenomenon, important non-verbal behavior. And I traveled to some countries and I noted a few patterns of turn taking. For example, in Japanese culture, which is a culture of silence, not a culture of loudness, not a culture of noise. In Japanese culture, the pattern that I discovered, the pattern of turn taking that I found was really amazing. The first speaker says something, the second speaker doesn't start immediately after the first speaker stops, right? So there is some time lag between the first speaker's turn and the second speaker's turn, because that's a culture of silence. That is the first pattern, right? A says something and finishes whatever A wants to say. B doesn't start his or her turn immediately after that. B waits for a minute, even sometimes for a couple of minutes. So that's pattern number 1. Then I went to some Arabic-speaking countries, and I found another pattern of turn taking. For example, A says something, and before A finishes whatever he or she wants to say, B starts talking. So that is interruption pattern, and that is basically found in Arabic-speaking countries. Then the third pattern is the American pattern or the European pattern. A says something, finishes, and immediately after that, we start saying something. Here in our country, in India, I don't know about China, but I suppose things are quite similar between the 2 countries. In our country, sometimes 4 people, 5 people, 8 people start talking together. So there is a total chaos. Looked at from another perspective, people can say that this is chaotic conversation, but it's not like that. Cultures are different. We can't say this is right and that is wrong. These are culture-specific behavioral patterns. So turn-taking is another aspect. Eye contact is also culture-specific. And let me narrate a story, an anecdote. Once upon a time, there was a little boy, and this little boy's maternal grandmother came from one culture, and his paternal grandmother came from another culture. Now, this little boy one day listened to a story told or narrated by the maternal grandmother. And while listening to her, he was all the time looking at the floor. He didn't establish eye contact with the grandmother. As soon as the grandmother completed the narration of the story, she gave a slap in the cheek of the boy. And she said to the boy, listen, my boy, my son, my child, in our culture, in my culture, when a senior person is talking to you, you're supposed to establish eye contact. Why were you all the time looking at the floor? You never looked at me when I was narrating the story. Now, the boy learned a lesson and then went to the other grandmother in the other culture. And one fine day, this grandmother narrated another story. And while she was narrating the story, he was all the time looking her in the eye. As soon as the grandmother finished narrating the story, she gave a slap in the other cheek of the boy and said, look here, my boy, look here, my child. In my culture, when a senior person is talking to you, you're not supposed to look that person in the eye. You're not supposed to establish eye contact with the senior person, like your grandmother. So this little example illustrates the point that even eye contact is culture bound, culture specific. We can't make general statements. You know, some people believe that turn-taking patterns are universally the same and eye contact is universally the same. And the distance that the speaker and the listener maintain between themselves is universally the same. No, it's not like that. Things are not as simple, as easy as they seem or as they look. So turn-taking patterns are culture specific, eye contacts are culture bound, and the closeness, the proximity between the speaker and the listener is also culture specific. It varies. It differs from one culture to the other. Now, let me narrate a story. Once there was a negotiation going on, and the two negotiators involved in this negotiation were from two different cultures. One negotiator came from the Arab countries, from Saudi, and the other negotiator was from the United States. Now, my observation tells me that Arabs are very physical people. They want, you know, like some Arab students, some Arab researchers carried out the research under my supervision. And whenever my supervisees, whenever my research scholars came to me, they literally shook me physically. They hugged me, they embraced me, and they shook hands very strongly because they believe in physicality, in physical touch. But that's not what happens in European countries or in America, in the United States of America, because they don't believe in that kind of physical touch. They don't like that kind of physical touch. So one day, this negotiation was happening in a particular hotel in Saudi Arabia, and the Arab wanted to be close to the American negotiator, but the American negotiator stepped back. They started their negotiation at 9:30 in the morning in a particular hall in a hotel, and the Arab wanted to be close, physically close to the American, but the American wanted to avoid physical touch. So he stepped back. The Arab again stepped forward a couple of steps and wanted to be closer to the American negotiator, but the American negotiator stepped back. So they started, in fact, they had started their negotiation, their conversation in one corner of the hall in the hotel. And by the time it was lunchtime, they were found in the fourth corner of the hall in the hotel. So this only means that physical proximity, physical closeness is also culture specific, culture bound. Now, these four examples, right? Turn-taking patterns and eye contact patterns and closeness between the speaker and the listener, and my own personal narrative when I was a British Council scholar in Edinburgh, in Scotland. These four examples throw light on one particular aspect of translanguaging. And that particular aspect of translanguaging is the non-verbal, non-linguistic aspect of communication. I'd like to give just one example, since our time is very limited and we're running short of time. I'd like to give or offer just one example from the linguistic domain or the verbal domain. Now, many people talk about mother tongue interference. They say, no, mother tongue should not be used in the classroom. It should not be used on the playground either. So there are many schools in India, and I suppose there are schools in China and other countries, in other non-native countries, where the use of the mother tongue is prohibited. And mother tongues are treated as if they were culprits, as if they were criminals, accomplices. So I don't subscribe to this kind of attitude towards mother tongue. Look at the word mother. the word mother includes the word other. So mother tongue and other tongue should go hand in hand. There should be no animosity. There should be no rivalry or competition between the mother tongue and the other tongue, because the very spelling of the word mother includes the spelling of the word other. So the mother tongue and the other tongue should go hand in hand. So some people think that mother tongue interferes. Interference is a negative expression, negative term. But in my opinion, there are lots of similarities. Yes, there are dissimilarities between, let's say, Chinese and English or Hindi and English. There is no denying the fact that there are differences between the other tongue and the mother tongue. Everyone knows that. But there are similarities. Yes, there are dissimilarities, but there are lots and lots of a bunch of similarities that exist between the other tongue and the mother tongue. And these similarities facilitate the language learning process, the acquisition process. And the similarities should be tracked, should be made the best use of, in order to facilitate the process of language learning, and so on and so forth. So I personally believe that mother tongue is not a hindrance, that mother tongue is a support, mother tongue is a help, mother tongue is a resource. And why should we waste a very important resource? We should tap it, and we should make the best use of the similarities between our mother tongue and the other tongue, that is the target language or English. So yes, there is interference of the mother tongue with the other tongue, but there is intervention as well. Intervention is a positive term or expression or positive word. Like, for example, India is not interfering between Russia and the other country, right? India is intervening. Intervention is a positive attempt. Interference is a negative attempt. So I believe that mother tongue should be used judiciously, wisely, and whenever necessary, because as you rightly pointed out, Professor Fang, you rightly pointed out that there are certain words, certain expressions in English which cannot be translated without the loss of any meaning, pragmatic meaning, social meaning, sociolinguistic meaning, or any type of meaning. So there are certain expressions, certain words in Indian languages, especially Hindi, for example, which cannot be translated in English. For example, in India, people say, "May I know your good name?" Now, when an English person listens to this kind of utterance, the person may be shocked, because for the English lady or the English gentleman, there is nothing like a good name and a bad name. A name is a name. But in our culture, we always say, "May I know your good name?" So you're right that there are many culturally loaded, culturally bound, culture-specific expressions, words, utterances, and so on and so forth. Once I was interacting with the German professor of English in Berlin, and during our conversation, she gave me some beautiful examples, really interesting examples. She said, once a German lady professor was talking to a professor from Indonesia, and she said to the professor from Indonesia, "Professor, your point is very pregnant. Your point is very pregnant." Now, when you look at German expressions, to be pregnant means to be precise, to be exact, to be pointed. You see? And your idea is the yellow of the egg. Now, yellow of the egg is a translation of the German expression, and it's transferred from German to English. So what we're trying to say, and what Professor Fang also tried to say, and very effectively, very efficiently, is that translanguaging should be used in our classrooms. And there is no point in prohibiting the use of the mother tongue. Judicious, wise, essential use of the mother tongue should always be a welcome thing. And I personally believe in bilingual education. I use bilingual dictionaries because there are similarities. And Chomsky talks about language universals. So all languages have nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs and so on and so forth. And all languages have questions and statements and imperative sentences and so on and so forth. So why can't we exploit or tap the similarities that exist between Chinese and English or Hindi and English? I think we should do that. Thank you very much once again, Professor Fang, for a wonderful talk. And we can't thank you enough for honoring our invitation. And we look forward to more sessions by you in the near future. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much once again. So back to you, Sachin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable inputs. It's always pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much for those wonderful comments. Now, I'd like to take a few moments to propose vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will be incomplete if I don't thank all of you. Therefore, on behalf of ELTAI Pune chapter, I extend my sincere gratitude to our guest speaker, Fan Gabriel Fang, for this significant deliverance on promoting decolonizing pedagogy through translanguaging. I'm sure that our viewers have learned many things from your talk, sir. It was indeed a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. I cannot thank Dr. Zedan Patil, our beloved president, for making this opportunity available to all of us. It is because of him that we always get to listen to such renowned experts. Special thanks to Captain Krishnamurthy Iyer, the principal of Tolani Maritime Institute, for his kind support. Thank you, sir, for your valuable support. We also extend our gratitude to all the participants and ELTAI Pune chapter members from India and abroad for their active participation. We are truly fortunate that we could reach out to all of you. I would also like to thank Dr. Atul, Pranima, Leena, Ashok, Kiran, Rahul, and all our office bearers for their kind support. Thank you, everyone. Last but not the least, all members of ELTAI Pune chapter, all the viewers of this webinar for making this effort more fruitful and meaningful. Thank you once again for your gracious participation and presence for this webinar.
Can I just take a minute, Sachin?
Yes, sir. Please.
I want to say, Professor Fang, are you listening?
Yeah.
Professor
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to say something very important. We have an association in our country, and that association is called English Language Teachers Association of India. That is ELTAI. And
I heard of that.
Yeah, we have about 60 branches or 60 chapters in the whole country. And I happen to be the president of one chapter, which is called Pune chapter. Pune is the name of a city in one of the provinces in India. So you can easily find it on the world map. So that is not the main thing that I want to say. What I want to say is that my team does everything. Sachin, who was anchoring this, and Pranima, who was anchoring this program, and Atul Patil and Rahul Kale, and other young members, team members, they do everything. I am just a catalyst. I'm just a catalyst in chemistry, as in chemistry. I just initiate the action and they take over and they do the rest of the things. So the credit goes to them.
Yeah, for everyone, but also very important catalysts as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Back to you, Sachin.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Now we declare that this webinar is over. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you next time for the 28th webinar. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Professor Fang. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.